Lubricate rotor O-rings and fit into the rotors. Slide the rotors onto the shafts. Position the rotors with the rotor dimples in the 3 and 9 o'clock plane for vertically ported pumps and 6 and 12 o'clock plane for horizontally ported pumps. Lubricate the rotor nut O-rings and fit onto the rotor nuts. Fit rotor nuts onto the shafts. Use a plastic or wooden block between the rotors to prevent them from turning, whilst tightening the rotor retention nuts to the recommended torque figure. For size 6 pumps, the rotors are retained by torque locking assemblies. Slide the torque locking assembly onto the shaft. Locate the clamp plate tool and tighten to the recommended torque figure. Tighten the torque locking assembly screws to the recommended torque figure. Unscrew the clamp plate tool and remove. Replace the rotor cap and tighten to the recommended torque figure. The back clearance can now be measured using feeler gauges. Any additional shimming required to bring the clearance within tolerance can now be determined. Fit additional shims if necessary and recheck the back, front, radial and mesh clearances are within tolerances shown on the appropriate clearance chart. Lightly smear the rotor case cover O-ring with grease and fit into the rotor case cover. Fit the rotor case cover onto the rotor case. Fit the rotor case cover nuts, tightening to the recommended torque figure. Remove the rotor case cover, rotors and rotor case. Extract the stationary seal ring and O-ring from the rotor case. Loosen the drive ring grub screws, 3 per shaft. Remove the rotary seal assembly from the shaft and abutment spacer if fitted. Extract the O-ring from the rotary seal assembly. Mechanical seals are fragile and extreme care should be taken when handling. Clean the seal components before fitting, checking there is no damage to the sealing faces. New O-rings should always be fitted during assembly. Lightly lubricate the stationary and rotary seal O-rings with appropriate grease and fit to seal rings. Replace abutment spacers, if fitted, onto the shafts. Slide rotary seal assemblies onto the shafts until the correct seal setting dimension is achieved, as shown in the operating manual. The seal setting dimension being from the rear face of the rotary seal assembly to the shaft shoulder. Tighten the drive ring grub screws to the recommended torque figure. Press the stationary seals into the rotor case bores. Wipe clean the sealing faces with solvent. Refit the rotor case, rotors and rotor case cover. Ensure that the flush media is turned off and disconnect the flushing pipework. Remove the rotor case cover and rotors. Undo the seal housing nuts and separate the seal housings from the rotor case. Undo and remove the rotor case retaining nuts and washers. Remove the rotor case. Extract the seal housing gasket, stationary seal ring and O-ring from the rotor case. Remove the seal housing and extract the lip seal using a screwdriver or lever, taking care not to damage the seal housing. Remove the rotary seal assembly from the shaft by loosening the drive ring grub screws, 3 per shaft. Slide off the shaft the abutment spacers and remove the spacer O-ring. Mechanical seals are fragile and extreme care should be taken when handling. Clean seal components before fitting, checking there is no damage to the sealing faces. New O-rings and lip seals should always be fitted during assembly. Lightly lubricate the spacer O-rings with appropriate grease and fit to spacers. Slide spacers onto the shafts. Lightly lubricate the rotary seal O-rings with appropriate grease and fit to seal rings. Slide rotary seal assemblies onto the shafts up to the spacers. Tighten the drive ring grub screws to the recommended torque figure.